Rationalize each denominator and simplify. Part A, we have 1/2 times radical 3 over 8x. The first thing we want to do is treat this radical, this fraction inside of a radical, as two separate radicals. So I'm going to rewrite this as 1/2 times radical 3 over radical 8x. Next, I'm going to simplify each of these radicals as best I can. So 8 is the same thing as 4 times 2, and 4 is a perfect square. So we can simplify this further as 1/2 times radical 3 divided by the square root of 4 is 2, and then 2x stays inside the radical. We can simplify this further by multiplying these together to give us 1 radical 3 in the numerator and 4 radical 2x in the denominator. Next, we can't have a radical in the denominator, so we're going to rationalize this by multiplying both numerator and denominator by the radical we're trying to get rid of. So we're going to multiply everything by radical 2x. So now when we multiply the tops, we have 1 times radical 6x. In the denominators, we have 4 times radical 4x squared. Now 4 is a perfect square, so we can break that out of the radical. And x squared is a perfect square. That means 1 radical 6x will stay. This 4 will stay on the outside. The square root of 4 is 2. The square root of x squared is x. We can go one step further and write this finally as radical 6x on top, and then 8x in the denominator. Part B, 2/3 times the square root of 1/2. We're going to start this in the same way we did the previous problem. We're going to write the fraction inside the radical as two separate radicals. So 2/3 times square root of 1 over square root of 2. Now, these square roots won't simplify, so we can multiply both numerator and denominator by what we're trying to get rid of, by radical 2. When we multiply these out, upstairs we've got 2 times radical 2. 1 times 2 is 2. In the denominator, the 3 will stay on the outside. The square root of 2 times square root of 2 is the square root of 4. 4 is a perfect square. The square root of 4 is 2. So we can write this as 3 times 2 in the denominator. And then finally we can reduce. The 2 in the numerator and denominator will cancel out, leaving us with the square root of 2 over 3. Part C, 5 times the square root of 3/5. We have a fraction inside the radical, so the first thing we'll do is write this as two separate radicals. This is the square root of 3 over the square root of 5. Next, we don't want to have a radical in the denominator, so we can rationalize by multiplying numerator and denominator both by square root of 5. We multiply the numerators, we've got 5 radical 15. We multiply the denominators, we've got square root of 25. 25 is a perfect square. The square root of 25 is 5. So we can write this as 5 radical 15 over 5. And then finally we reduce. The 5 in numerator and denominator reduce out. So we've got the square root of 15 over 1, which is just square root of 15. Part D, 5 over square root of 5 minus 3. Our denominator has two terms, so multiplying by a single radical is not enough to fix the problem. To get rid of the radical in the denominator, we're going to multiply by the conjugate of the denominator, which is the square root of 5 plus 3. We multiply this in numerator and denominator. When we distribute on top, we have 5 radical 5 plus 5 times 3 is 15. When we multiply in the denominator, we've got radical 5 times radical 5, which is radical 25. Radical 5 times 3 is 3 radical 5. We've now distributed radical 5 to everything, so we're done with this term. When we distribute the negative 3 through, negative 3 times radical 5 is negative 3 radical 5. Negative 3 times positive 3 is negative 9. Now we see in the denominator, positive 3 radical 5 and negative 3 radical 5 cancel out. Also, the square root of 25 is 5. So the denominator becomes 5 minus 9. In the numerator, there are no radicals we can simplify, so we just leave this as 5 radical 5 plus 15. Now we can combine like terms in the denominator, so 5 subtract 9 is negative 4. And everything in the numerator will just stay. Oftentimes we don't like to see a negative in the denominator, so to fix this up, we'll multiply numerator and denominator both by negative 1. When we do this on top, we've got negative 5 radical 5 minus 15. And then downstairs, negative 1 times negative 4 is positive 4. Part E. We have two terms in the denominator. So to rationalize this, just like in the previous problem, we're going to multiply by the conjugate of the denominator. So multiply by radical 2 plus 2 in both numerator and denominator. Since we have two terms, I'm going to put this in parentheses. Now we distribute through up top first. So this 3x will distribute to both terms. 3x times radical 2 is 3x radical 2. 3x times 2 is 6x. Next, we distribute 2 to both terms. So 2 times radical 2 is 2 radical 2. 2 times 2 is 4. Now in the denominator, radical 2, we distribute that through first. So radical 2 times radical 2 is radical 4. Square root of 2 times 2 becomes 2 radical 2. When we distribute this negative 2 to both terms, negative 2 times radical 2 is minus 2 radical 2. Negative 2 times positive 2 is minus 4. Okay, we can now combine like terms. I see that this positive 2 radical 2 and negative 2 radical 2 will cancel out. If we rewrite and simplify, in the numerator we can't really do anything. This radical is already simplified. This radical is simplified. There are no like terms, so we're just going to copy down what we see. 3x radical 2 plus 6x plus 2 radical 2 plus 4. Now in the denominator, the square root of 4 is 2. These terms are gone. Minus 4 we still have in. Finally, we combine like terms in the denominator, which gives us negative 2. And as we said before, we can't do anything with the top, so we'll just let it sit as 3x radical 2 plus 6x plus 2 radical 2 plus 4. And then finally, as an optional step, many people don't like to see a negative in the denominator, so to fix that, we can multiply both numerator and denominator by negative 1. So our numerator becomes negative 3x radical 2 minus 6x minus 2 radical 2 minus 4. So all the signs just switched around when we distribute. And in the denominator, negative 1 times negative 2 is 2.